it is incredible how many people died for the so-called Holy Land. The problem really started 2,000 years ago. The Romans had conquered Judea, the land of the Jews, and the Jews revolted against the Romans 3 times. The first time in 66, in the year 66 after Christ. Incidentally, Jesus was born in the Roman Empire. Anyway, in the year 66, the Jews revolted. The Romans were brutal oppressors. They did not forgive, and they destroyed the temple of the Jews, and that's the wall where the Jews go to cry today in Jerusalem. The Jews revolted 2 more times, and Hadrian was emperor when they revolted the 3rd time, and the 3rd time Hadrian, fed up, decided to order to, besides the devastation and the killing and so on, and the destruction of Jerusalem, he ordered that Jerusalem be renamed Aeolia Capitolina, different name, and Israel, the area to be renamed not Judea but Palestina. That's where the name Palestine comes from. And the Jews to be expelled. He ordered the Jews to be expelled, and that's why the Jews started spreading around the Western world. Some of them spread inside the Roman Empire, North Africa. The Roman Empire at that point controlled the whole Mediterranean, so Southern Europe, North Africa, Middle East. Some of them went south to Arabia, where eventually they had problems with the Muslims. Some of them went to Iran, and so on. So the Romans basically tried to completely destroy the whole history of Jews living in Judea. Now, Constantine, well, the Roman Empire had been partitioned before in Eastern and Western Empire. Constantine, in the year 330, moved the capital to the east, to a Greek village called Byzantium, which he renamed Constantinople, and today is known as Istanbul. So when 60 years later, eventually this became a complete partition. There was the Western Empire, was capital of Rome. Very soon it would be devastated by the barbarians. The Eastern Empire, with capital in Byzantium, Constantinople, survived another 1,000 years. Palestina came under the rule of the Byzantine Empire. The Arabs conquered Palestine from the Byzantine Empire about 638. I think 638 is when Jerusalem was captured. The Arabs were coming from Arabia, the peninsula, and that they were bringing a new religion, Islam. They were Muslims, and so the people of Palestine were now ruled by Arabs, by an Arab dynasty, and encouraged, if not forced, to adopt a new religion. Palestine remained under Muslim rule for over 1,300 years, with brief interruptions due to the Crusades during the Middle Ages. So, no surprise, there was widespread adoption of the Arabic language, the Arabic culture, and the Arabic religion, which was Islam. So the people there, most of the people there identified as Arabs. There were still nomads, Bedouins, whatever, and some Christians remained from the Crusades. But essentially, that area, Palestina, became an Arab Muslim thing. It went through a number of different Arab dynasties. Eventually, the Mamluks took over Egypt, and Egypt was also controlling Palestine. Eventually, the Ottoman Empire conquered Palestine in 1516. The Ottomans were Turks. They were coming from Central Asia, and they conquered Palestine in 1516. Again, they were still Muslims. Now, the Ottoman Empire became a rich empire, rich and powerful, and its capital, Istanbul, the old Constantinople, became a cosmopolitan city. Istanbul had Italians, Greeks, Slavs, people from all over the Western world. And immigration was allowed. And some of the people who decided to take advantage of this were the Jews of Europe. The first Jews started moving to Palestine at the end of the 19th century, more or less spontaneously. I mean, some of them found out that it was possible to buy land legally, or just to take land that was not owned by anybody, and so they moved back to Judea. The Jews remembered, even 2,000 years later, remembered that was the land of their ancestors because of the religion. The whole point of the Jewish religion is that God gave them that land. So anyway, one major motivation for the Jews to move there was the pogroms, in particular the pogroms in the Russian Empire. So the Jews persecuted, some of them started dreaming, why don't we just move back to the land of our ancestors now that it's possible to emigrate there. And then this became an ideological movement called Zionism, established by Theodor Herzl. The first Zionist Congress was in 1897, so at that point it became and the Ottomans started paying attention. They didn't like it, restricted immigration and so on. But then World War I starts, 1914, and when it ends a few years later, the result is the disintegration of two major empires, the Austrian Empire, that now we don't care about, and the Ottoman Empire. So the disintegration of these empires gave rise to a number of countries. In Europe, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and so on. In the Middle East, Turkey is the heir to the Ottoman Empire, no longer an empire, trying to be more of a European-style republic. And then the provinces of the Ottoman Empire become Syria, Iraq, of course, Egypt, Jordan, and so on. Palestine and all of these provinces controlled by the winning powers, which is Britain and France essentially, and ruled by Western friendly kings. Now, what happens to Palestine in this context? It's assigned to Britain in 1920. The British receive a mandate to control Palestine. Now, this, of course, increased Jewish immigration into Palestine, and the local people were not particularly happy. There were cases of Palestinians, meaning the Arabs living there, massacring Jewish immigrants. Now, what happens next is, so at that point there was already an idea to partition Palestine into states, a Jewish state and an Arab state. Anyway, World War II starts. During World War II, Hitler was obsessed with exterminating the Jews. He kills 6 million Jews. Ironically, at the same time, the Jews of Palestine were fighting against Britain, which was the main country fighting Hitler. In Palestine, the Palestinians, the Jews, some of them organized terrorist groups. The first terrorists of Palestine were Jews, not Arabs, and they staged some famous terrorist attacks against the British. So at the end of World War II, on one hand, the Europeans feel bad that millions of Jews have been deported and killed by Germany and its allies. At the same time, we have a Jewish insurrection in Palestine. So it became sort of natural to say, okay, let's speed up the partition of Palestine in a Jewish state and an Arab state. Note that, so two things. Number one, Palestine never had a particular status during the 1,300 years that was under Muslim rulers. It was always part of the province of Syria. And second, nobody asked the Palestinians what they wanted. It was just the British had this plan to create two states, and the Arab kings around Palestine were opposed. Nobody asked the Palestinians what they thought. My opinion, if somebody had asked them, they would have been happy to join Jordan, which at the time was called Transjordan, because, you know, ethnic, linguistic, religious closeness. Anyway, so then you know, the date of the date when these two states were supposed to be born was 1948, I think May. Anyway, there was trouble before that date. Eventually, Israel became independent. Immediately, the kings of the surrounding states, Syria, Lebanon, Transjordan, Iraq, Egypt, did I forget one? They attack Israel. Israel receives no assistance from the West. In fact, it was fighting mainly with weapons purchased from Eastern Europe that was becoming communist, actually. I think both the United States and Britain thought that the Arabs would go and win. Remember, these Arab kings were all pro-Western, so well, surprise. Teeny Israel wins. Israel at that point was really teeny. It was the land assigned to the Jews of Palestine was larger than the land assigned to the Arabs of Palestine, despite the fact that the Arabs were double, the population was double, and that's one reason why the Arab states didn't like the partition. But anyway, Israel was very teeny, managed to win, and that's the beginning of the big trouble, meaning that at that point Israel seizes new territory, expels Arabs from Palestine, and that's really the beginning of the Palestinian diaspora. Then there were more wars, and each war was won by Israel, and each war resulted in more suffering for the Palestinians, for the Arabs of Palestine. Now, so eventually the Palestinians organized their own terrorism, and number of organizations born that were terrorists. You know, one, Hamas, eventually rules over Gaza. The big one, Palestinian becomes the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. That's the situation today. How does Iran enter the picture? Well, Iran used to be a very westernized country, a closer ally of the West than Israel at the beginning. It was ruled by a dictator that was installed by Britain and the United States in a famous coup of 1953. It was a close ally of Israel when Israel was fighting the Arabs. Iran is Shiite. It's Muslim but Shia, and most of the Arabs, all of the Arabs at the time, are Sunni. Anyway, long fighting between Shiite and Sunni, many centuries. during the 6-day war, Iran supplied Israel with most of its oil. So how did the hostility begin? Well, Israel supported the dictator of Iran. There was already one problem. And Israel stole $1 billion. Never paid the money that was due. In 1979, there was an Islamic revolution in Iran, and the Ayatollahs seized power. So the revolution in Iran actually was started just as a revolution against the dictator, but eventually the Ayatollah, the supreme religious leaders of Shiite, seized power. So then they remembered everything. They remembered that the United States helped install the previous dictator. They remembered that Israel supported the dictator, and again, Israel owed money. So anyway, the supreme leader was Khomeini, and he called Israel an enemy of Islam, called it Little Satan. Why Little Satan? Because the United States was the great Satan. So that's how the hostility between Iran and Israel started. Israel was very smart, by the way. Until that point, Israel was an ally of the West, but not so strategic. But after 1979, the United States and the West lost their main ally in the Middle East, Iran. And Israel was very good at presenting itself as the one trusted ally at a time when countries like Syria, Iraq, Egypt, they were all moving towards communism, towards the Soviet Union. So Israel benefited enormously from the Iranian Revolution. Now, Iran's nuclear program. Iran's nuclear program started actually in the 1950s under the dictator installed by the United States. And so that program has been around for a while. Iran has had nuclear scientists since the 50s. After the revolution, after the Islamic Revolution, Iran's leaders have repeatedly called for the destruction of Israel, which of course to Israelis that evokes Hitler's call for exterminating all Jews. And so you put these things together and you understand why Israel has been obsessed for a long time about Iran's nuclear program. Now, no question, a country that has a nuclear program and tells you, I want to destroy you, is obviously an existential threat. In reality, we don't know much about Iran's nuclear program. Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, has been saying since 1992 that Iran is very close to having an atomic bomb. The leader of Iran, who succeeded Khomeini, is called Khamenei, has repeatedly said that he does not want to have an atomic bomb. So they're both big liars, so it's hard to believe anybody. Anyway, Iran also funds Hezbollah and Hamas, which are the two main terrorist organizations fighting Israel. The war between Israel and Iran has never been a direct war. It's always been through proxies. So anyway, that's how the two countries pit themselves against each other. After the terrorist attack of 2023, Israel has gone after Hamas and Hezbollah, so weakened dramatically the proxies of Iran. Coincidence or not, Assad's regime collapsed in Syria. So at some point, Iran had created a corridor. When the United States removed Saddam Hussein from power in 2003, indirectly it helped Iran. Why? Saddam Hussein was a Sunni dictator. When he fell, the majority of Iraq was Shia, and in the more or less democratic system of Iraq, Shiites have ruled Iraq since 2003. And then north of Iraq is Syria. Syria was run by Assad, who was not Sunni, and again it was much closer to Iran. And then the Lebanon is de facto controlled by Hezbollah, which is again controlled by Iran. So Iran's sphere of influence has spread significantly in the Middle East. In the last 2 years, Israel has basically decapitated the main actors of this corridor, except for Iraq. But in Syria, the dictator disappeared. I think that's mostly because Russia, which was the main protector of Assad, Russia is busy in overstretched in Ukraine. But anyway, whatever the reasons, the result is that right now Israel got rid of the threats of Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria. Iraq is quiet. So Iran has been greatly weakened, and then of course Israel has proven to be a much more technological country. Technology and science do matter, and Israel has attracted great scientists, attracted and nurtured great scientists and engineers, whereas from Iran most of the brightest left. Eventually this makes a difference. So Israel bombed Iran relatively easily. Note that no major Arab country has truly condemned Israel from bombing Iran, which tells you that also the Sunni Arabs view Iran as a problem. To Iran's credit, it was in a sense a force of stability, not only instability. For example, it fought the Taliban in Afghanistan way before the United States. Not only the Taliban, but also Al-Qaeda, ISIS. These are all Sunni terrorist groups. And he fought Saddam Hussein. The United States actually supported Saddam Hussein when it attacked Iran in 1980. That long war killed a lot of Iranians. But of course, from the point of view of Israel, Iran has been a force of instability. Even Iraq was stabilized not by the United States, it was stabilized by Iran. Okay, anyway, coming to the nuclear program. In 2015, Barack Obama and the Europeans worked out a deal with Iran that imposed limitations on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. But then after Obama came Trump, and Trump, first thing, he withdrew from this, he pulled out of this agreement and reimposed the sanctions. Of course, Iran responded by resuming its nuclear program. In fact, I'm surprised it didn't accelerate the program. The program expanded, and whatever the situation is now in Iran, which we don't really know, it was caused by Trump. Trump is the one who pulled out of that agreement. Trump bombed Iran to solve a problem that he created, and in any case, that problem did not constitute an immediate threat to the United States. Iran has neither the atomic bomb nor the rockets to strike the United States. Unlike North Korea, which has the atomic bomb, it has probably 60 of them, and is perfecting its rockets to reach the United States. So now it's really a duel between Trump and Iran's leader Khamenei, which is kind of sad because these are two old, not very sane men. Trump is 79 and Khamenei is 86. Both have another thing in common, by the way. Trump, Khamenei, and even Netanyahu, they are extremely unpopular at home. they would lose a fair election right now. So this is a war among three politicians who right now would be fired in their own country. And neither of them asked their people if they wanted to fight this war. It is certainly a big distraction from Trump's failure to lower inflation, to stop the war in Ukraine, to repeal Obamacare, to build the wall, which is still unfinished, and so on and so on. All issues that disappear from the news when there's a bigger news to cover, like the bombing of Iran's nuclear sites. And also all the distraction from all the corruption that is going on in Washington. Really staggering amount of corruption right now in Washington. It didn't surprise me that Iran turned out to be so weak. Israel inflicted massive damage and Iran was basically powerless. Air Force, Navy, everything in Iran seems to be very primitive. I'm sure somebody in Iran regrets selling drones to Russia that Russia is using in Ukraine. Anyway, it didn't surprise me that Iran was so weak. It surprised me that Iran was so naive. Apparently in 2003, the Supreme Leader Khomeini truly stopped the nuclear program. Otherwise, in 22 years, Iran would have the nuclear bomb by now. It's not so difficult once you have the uranium and the centrifuges. And it should be obvious the difference in treatment. Donald Trump treated North Korea as a power, treated its dictator with respect. The same Donald Trump has treated Iran with absolute disrespect and bombed it with no justification. Again, Iran did not constitute a threat to the United States. The difference in treatment should be obvious, unfortunately will be obvious to any dictator in the world. If you have nuclear weapons, you are treated much better by the United States. If you don't have them, you are bombed to non-existence.